Hey everyone, Wolf Lord Rho here. Today we're discussing life within an Emperor's Children warband. How they, of all the traitor legions, struggle with navigators. Spoiler warning to begin, as the events we're discussing today are from the Warhammer 40k novel Lord of Excess by author Rich McCormick. As always, I really recommend you read the stories for yourself first, without spoilers, as that's the best way to enjoy the lore for yourself. But with that said, let's just jump straight in. Now, of all the falls of the traitor legions, the Emperor's Children's descent always kind of felt the quickest and hardest to me. The extremes and depravity the legion fell to, really out of all the legions, overshadowing the force they were originally. And I guess in becoming dedicated to the god of excess, that shouldn't be too much of a surprise. In truth, of course, every legion dedicated to a particular god has become eternally altered by that servitude. The Death Guard to Nurgle, the Thousand Sons to Tzeentch, and the World Eaters to Khorne, each becoming consumed by their chosen path. Yet of all those dedicated legions, it's always been the Emperor's Children that's retained a large degree of mystery to me. Not for who they are necessarily, but more just how they operate. What life is like within this shattered legion. We've seen a lot of the Death Guard over recent years. The Thousand Sons are largely an open book thanks to the rubric. We've even seen plenty of Night Lords and Alpha Legion. And I think the World Eaters deserve a little more credit than the angry stereotype might suggest. But still, they are largely straightforward. However, with the Emperor's Children, it was a mystery on just how they really operate. Are the crews of their vessels simply enslaved? Or is there more behind it? Culted followers in their own right? Do the Emperor's Children even manage stable crews aboard their vessels? Or is it a constant churn of needing resupply? The flaws of their pursuit of excess? And well, while we don't have all the answers just yet, we have begun to receive some, and we have received an absolutely fascinating glimpse of how navigators are handled within the Legion, how life serving the Emperor's Children affects them. And this was within the novel Lord of Excess by author Rich McCormick, within the warband known as the Adored. It was a difficult business maintaining a navigator on board a vessel of the Emperor's Children. Some simply went mad, the cacophony of sound and sensation too much for their delicate psychic capabilities. Others became distracted, their minds turned from the minutiae of piloting a vast warship through the eddies and tides of unreality by earthly pains and pleasures. Xantine had seen this happen firsthand. Deploying his silver tongue and the gift of a few hundred slaves, he'd once managed to orchestrate an audience with the Dancer in Silks, once a brother of the Third, and now choir master of his own warband, the Souls of Splendor. Conscious of the Dancer's infamously fickle nature, Xantine had ordered the exhortation to the rendezvous point, with weapons on standby and void shields to full. But of the rival warband, there was no sign. Weeks later, they discovered their ship, the Splendor's Vision, half embedded in a moon on the outer edge of the system. Investigation of what was left of the stricken craft turned up several dozen transhuman bodies and Vox records that indicated the ship's navigator had been inspecting his reflection in a nearby mirror when his talents were called upon to navigate safely out of the warp. Indeed, the records suggested he had been admiring himself in the same mirror for the previous standard month. forcing the recently transferred slaves to feed and bathe him so he would not have to avert his eyes from his own form. Xantine found it difficult to understand what the navigator saw in the reflected form that bewitched him so. But then, it had been hard to see much of the man by then. The majority of his face had melded into solid rock. Even navigators still enthralled to the Imperium tended to mutate as their careers went on, but those that found themselves in service to warbands like Xantine's own tended to change more rapidly, in more exotic ways, the currents of the warp colliding and coalescing to make something truly special. And this is the kind of stuff I find absolutely fascinating. These small little snippets and revelations that just give you a piece of insight into the normal life. The hows and whys the traitor legions do the things they do. The individual differences that make them unique. Here, as you kind of expect, the revelation and admission that indeed it is hard to have a navigator on board an Emperor's Children vessel, or at least keep one safely. Some simply went mad, the cacophony of sound and sensation too much for their delicate psychic capabilities. Others became distracted. Again, of all the gods, of all the legions, it's the Emperor's Children who have become orientated around sensation. That pursuit of something else, something more. Serving the Death Guard would see a navigator corrupted, bloated, become as decaying as everything else around it. But the focus would remain on its service, its purpose. Here with the Emperor's Children, as much as they need that service, it's an eternal battle to keep it. The navigators becoming as entranced with the lure of Slaanesh, the vanity, the excess, as everyone else. Servitude of Slaanesh, of all of the gods, suffers from distraction the most. The perfect example, the navigator abandoning, ignoring its sole purpose at the vital moment. Translation out of the warp, to look at itself in the mirror. Leaving the ship and everyone on it, to become embedded in a moon. An entire vessel and its crew, wiped out in the blink of an eye, thanks to one navigator's distraction. And you do kind of get the impression here that the Emperor's Children do still realise how important a navigator is. How crucial that it is the one servant that even they would prefer to remain apart, as they were intended, immune from the very temptations they themselves crave, they themselves embrace. An irony, really, that the path they've chosen and worship is their own hindrance in this particular situation. As here we learn indeed, navigators of the Emperor's Children do mutate faster than any other, which again is perhaps no surprise. The perfect example, the demonic mess that Xantine's own navigator has become, fusing with the very ship around it. The mound of flesh stank, even for Xantine, who had stood unbowed in the galaxy's most depraved charnel houses. The smell made his lurid turquoise eyes water. For the Exhortation's mortal crew, it was too much. Most of them clipped their nostrils closed with pincers of gold or silver, breathing through gauze-wrapped mouths. Others had appended nose bags over their faces, each filled with narcotic herbs and pungent spices, giving them the appearance of large flightless birds as they movered around the cramped bridge. It impeded the crew's work, but they were necessary steps. After all, the mound was far more important than any of them. It was called Galea, but in truth, it was the exhortation, the ship's brain and body, the muscle that gave it the impetus to run, and the imperative to fight. It had the cognition to make careful and complex jumps, allowing the ship and its master to sail the warp without a living navigator on board. That wasn't technically true. It had been a navigator once, Xantine knew. Galea was born the youngest daughter of Resh Iril, one of the many scions of Navigator House Iril. The house had long been a solid and dependable source of navigators for Terra's small-scale shipping enterprises. But the Lady Resh's Epicurean tastes would not be sated by a life considered merely comfortable. Seeking pleasure, she had disguised herself and departed the throne world, using her talents to eventually reach the fringes of the Eye of Terror. Xantine had not met Resh Iril. The lady had died in the employ of a long-departed warlord, whom he didn't care to recall. But she had left a crowd of daughters. Galea was one of these, more or less baseline in appearance, before she had turned her name and her body over to become the pulsing, stinking blob of matter whose tendrils now ran the full length of the exhortation. And to think, this used to be a loyal Imperial vessel. What a snapshot of how far the traitor forces have fallen. We've got a navigator, given over to the demon essentially, mutated and warped to become one with the ship. And it stinks so bad the crew aboard can't bear it, even bringing a space marine to have tiered vision. The human crew doing whatever they can to be able to still work and function. And even with that, the mess and state this navigator's become, such is its importance, it's a sacrifice they have to make. And we even got a little snippet of how these navigators fall. One simple little line on why this navigator's line left Terra in the first place. Not being content with merely comfortable. Maybe it was a truly innocent reason at its beginning, wanting to simply lead a better life. Who knows, but it's an example of how quickly and easily any line of thinking can be turned to the whims and ways of the ruinous powers. And when it comes to a god who preys on your desire, being surrounded by that constantly, like these psychic navigators must be aboard an Emperor's Children vessel, honestly you have to ask, what hope do they have? How much harder is it to resist something that whispers your desire as opposed to your doom? So a glimpse of the realities and difficulties the mutating navigators can inflict upon the Legion. How integral yet burdensome they are and can become. Another traitor legion may simply abandon the navigator as soon as it became a problem, but you get the sense the Emperor's Children don't have that option, that they go through them so quickly that they have to simply grin and bear it, do whatever they can to keep the navigator functional. And this gives us some great understanding of the larger picture, in knowing the Shattered Legion suffers so with that far more rapid rate of mutation. The navigators obviously must be in huge demand for the entirety of the Emperor's Children Legion, an already precious commodity, becoming nigh on priceless. And so you can imagine the Emperor's Children would go to great lengths to secure fresh navigators for their particular warband. Some surely through diplomacy and trade with the other traitors, most likely calling in a favour and then becoming indebted to Abaddon, as the main source within the eye, you would assume. And they would also no doubt be a high priority target when it comes to the Imperium. By far the most prized objective when raiding real space. It wouldn't surprise me at all to learn that the Emperor's Children warbands had been raiding and pillaging all across Imperium Nihilus, acquiring and accumulating as many navigators as possible, either for their own selfish desires, or because they know how valuable they are to their fellow Legion, how rich in trade and parley the navigators will be. Let's be honest here, the Legion is shattered for a reason, so the vying warbands most certainly wouldn't be above manipulating their kin for a desperately needed navigator. And so, yeah, sure, it's only a brief little insight that we've seen thus far, but it's actually the perfect example of how much you can learn from the small details, the seemingly insignificant passages. And with the surely likely Emperor's Children Codex to come, hopefully this is just the beginning of truly getting to see the life within the Legion. But as always everyone, what do you think? Are you surprised that navigators cause such issue to the Emperor's Children? Or can you kind of understand why, of all the traitor legions, it would be the biggest problem to them? Considering this, like me, do you expect navigators to be a very valuable commodity within the warbands? One they would be willing to go to war for, or pay the highest price? And will the reunion of the Legion help change that? If indeed it does transpire, will they overcome the problem? Or is it simply a matter of raiding and pillaging as much as possible, amassing their own sizable pool? Or is it even something Fabius Bile could clone? As always, leave your thoughts in the comments below. Huge thank you to all my subscribers, your support truly means a lot to me, it really does. If you're new, please consider subscribing to help the channel grow. And if you enjoyed this particular vid, then why not drop a like on it too. But with that said, I am off, and I'll see you all again real soon.